Hi, it's Nina with Parish Learning Zone. Thank you for joining us today for our weekly Wednesday webinar. A question that we've been hearing a lot that I'm going to address today is, do students need to take the SAT or the ACT to apply to college in 2020? If it was your plan as a rising senior this year to take the SAT or the ACT, it has undoubtedly been a very stressful process for you. There's been a lot of cancellations of SAT and ACT tests that were supposed to be offered in the spring and early summer, and there's been a lot of uncertainty as far as how and when those tests will take place. The good news about the ACT and the SAT is that there are scheduled dates to take those tests now for the fall. And so for the SAT test, they are offering dates in August. There's the regular end of August SAT. They're offering September, October, November, and December. So there's a date for the SAT every single month to try to make up for lost time. And those are open for registration now, although there's a chance that when you go to register, you might experience some delays on the SAT website because there's a lot of traffic on there and a lot of students who are trying to register for tests because they weren't able to take their test in the spring. So go ahead and start early if you are trying to register for the SAT test for the fall. For the ACT registration, they do have tests that are being offered in the fall as well, and registration for those opens up the last week in July for those fall tests that you might be looking at in the future. And I'll put the links here on in the blog summary that I write up for this Wednesday webinar. I'll put the links for those sites where you go to register for the SAT on the College Board site, and I'll also put the link for the ACT registration page. But what we've been hearing is a lot of questions because there's a lot of information and articles floating around out there that it seems like there are a lot of colleges that are not requiring the SAT or the ACT this year. So students are wondering, do I even need to take the SAT and the ACT? How do I find out if the colleges that I'm applying to are requiring the SAT or the ACT? And so I'll address that question first. Do the colleges that I'm applying to require testing this year? And the answer is that some colleges have decided, and there's quite a few colleges in Virginia. Some of the big schools like the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech have made the SAT and the ACT tests optional this year, and so that's received a lot of publicity. But out of the 47 public and nonprofit private colleges in Virginia, 24 have currently made the test optional. So right now it's about less than half of the schools in Virginia, or right around that halfway mark. So chances are, if you are applying to schools, a variety of schools, a handful of schools, there's going to be some that are still requiring the SAT and the ACT. And so for that reason, a lot of students are still in a position where they need to take the test. And what I'll do is, there is a comprehensive list of schools that are requiring the SAT and ACT, and those who have gone to test optional policies, or something called test flexible that we'll talk about in a minute. There's all sorts of new vocabulary to figure out this year with the SAT and the ACT testing. And I'll link in the summary and in the comments here on this blog, I'll link the list of schools and their policies for testing this year, the list of schools that are test optional. I'll link it here so that you can look up your school. Another idea is to go to their admissions page, and usually there will be a statement there telling what their policy is this year for the SAT and the ACT test. And if it's still unclear, there's contact information on their admissions page where you can contact someone at the admissions office and find out what their policy is this year for testing. So a lot of times after we figure out these basic things about how to look up information about whether the school is requiring the SAT or the ACT, students have questions about the different testing policies that schools are adopting this year. So the first question that a lot of times students have is, what does test optional actually mean? Does test optional mean that they're not looking at SAT and ACT tests? And so the short answer is no, that's not what it means. Schools that are test optional are still looking at ACT and SAT scores. They just aren't requiring that students submit those scores. So if your school is test optional, it means that you can submit your application and they will accept it and review it without SAT and ACT test scores. However, other students may still submit their SAT and ACT test scores if they've taken them for review. So they will be looking at the test scores for the students that submit their test scores. That's what test optional means. Another term that we hear a lot this year is something called test flexible. And I found that that can mean a couple of different things. It can mean, sometimes when people use it, they mean that schools have a flexible deadline for testing. They're giving students some more flexibility in when their test scores can be submitted, because of course a lot of students haven't had the opportunity to take the tests in the spring when they're usually offered. The March and May and June testing, a lot of that was canceled, and so a lot of schools have adopted a test flexible policy where you can submit your scores separate from your application at a more flexible or a later deadline. Test flexible can also mean that schools are accepting other tests that you may have taken other than or in lieu of the SAT and the ACT results. And what tests they're accepting can vary by school. So that's worth checking into a little further if they're using that test flexible terminology to see what that actually means. Another term that we hear thrown around and often confused with test optional is test blind. Schools that are test optional are not test blind necessarily. So test blind means that they're not looking at any test scores. So that would mean that not only it's not just optional to submit your test scores, the school actually is not considering or looking at any test scores. Very few colleges right now are test blind. There's only a handful that are test blind. Most are test optional, meaning that they're still looking at and considering SAT and ACT scores for students who submit them. Some schools have gone test blind on their policies for SAT-2 tests and AP tests, meaning that they're not accepting or looking at any of those scores from any students this year. So it is worth looking at a school's policy on SAT 2 tests and AP tests, because some of them are not accepting those this year that normally do, and that's what test blind refers to. The last question that I've heard students ask a lot is, does all of this mean that I am excused from taking the SAT and the ACT this year? And the answer to that question is probably not. Like I mentioned previously, if you are planning to apply to a variety of schools, most students will have a school on their list that is still requiring the SAT or the ACT, or that hasn't decided whether they're requiring. There's no information about what they're requiring, and in that case, the student still does need to take the SAT or the ACT, and they should plan to take those tests in the fall when they're offered, which would mean registering and preparing now. The only case where students are excused from and do not need to take the SAT or the ACT would be if they're only applying to schools that are test optional and they've decided that they don't need the SAT or the ACT to supplement their application. So you do need to remember that schools that are test optional are still considering those scores if you submit them. So if you're a student that tests well and is most likely to get a high SAT or ACT score that matches up with your academic record, or perhaps is even better and would enhance your academic record, it would still be in your advantage to have that test score to go along with your transcript if it was supportive of that transcript. So even with the test optional schools, they will review those scores if you send them in, and if it would be in your best interest to send them in, it's probably still a good idea to do so. And a lot of schools that students are applying to still do require the SAT and ACT, and in those cases, students do need to take them and submit them with the application. So for most students, it's sort of just like normal, where they will still need to take the SAT or ACT test unless they're applying only to schools that are test optional and they've decided to opt out of taking the SAT test. The last question that we've been getting a lot is, well, I'm not in school. It's been a long time since I've done math because we basically did not have the fourth 9 weeks with our teacher. We just had online class. And so now I'm not feeling as prepared. There's a lot of math that I've forgotten. It's been a while since I've practiced for the SAT. And we do have I did a blog in one of these webinars earlier in the summer on how to prepare for the SAT at home, or how to brush up if it's been a while since you've taken the test. So I will link that here for some suggestions of things that you can do at home. At Parish Learning Zone, we are offering, starting next week, our small group, and there's still room to register for that in the next couple of days. If you'd like to work with a small group here to prepare for the August test. And in the coming weeks, we're going to offer some workshops for students who are looking to brush up on their SAT skills. We'll have a short SAT workshop and some workshops specifically for grammar, which on the SAT they call writing skills, and reading comprehension, as well as specific math skills. And we always offer individual tutoring for the ACT and the SAT test. So of course, just like always, if you have any questions about the SAT, feel free to leave your comments here, and I'd be happy to answer your questions about SAT or ACT, or talk with you on the phone, or here if you've joined us in this chat and you have a question about whether you should take the SAT or ACT this year, make a comment, and I'm answering back the comments here as they come, so I'd be happy to talk with you about your question. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Wednesday webinar, and I hope that you'll send me any questions that you have so we can discuss them in future webinars. And feel free to contact us with those here on our Facebook page, or of course you can go to our website and there's a contact form there where you can get more information, or contact us, send us a message that way. I hope that you have a good week, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.